Hi, Sue, can you hear me?
Hi, I can hear you nicely.
I think my computer still has the same problem
Oh, okay.
when sounding this side. I'm still waiting for Neil though, but otherwise it's connected. It's the sound that's the problem.
Okay. So hopefully Neil will bring his.
Yes,
Okay.
someone will text him now and find out where he is. But
I
I've
think,
set up everything.
okay.
We just need his laptop to connect.
Okay. No rush. It's very early. I'm actually on time for once. I said I'd be on time online at 1:45. Normally I skate in at 1 minute to. So we've got lots of time.
Okay, okay. No, I'll just check up on him now. I've just disconnected the audio from the room because it's making like
Echo.
some sounds like echoing and cutting as if it's your network. That's the problem.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, I'll be here.
Hi. We need a laptop. So I managed to sort it out, but
Hi, Sue.
Daniel,
How's it?
good. I can hear an echo. Someone. Oh,
That should be better.
yeah, that's better.
Okay, awesome.
I just
I
want to
just
make
need
it
to
clear this is juice. I said, as I lifted my glass, I thought this looks like rosé, but it's cranberry juice.
I was about to say, lucky you, hey?
Ah,
Yeah, no, okay, wonderful. I'm just trying to check. You wanted to play some video as well,
oh,
right?
hi, Anne May. This is Anne May from Northwest. Hello. Yes, I want to play a video. So if I can just quickly go to full screen and hopefully it's showing okay on your side. We just rush through till I get to a video.
Better?
Okay, this is the video now.
The concentration camps operated by the Nazis will forever be remembered as one of the most shameful.
Did that work?
Perfect.
good. And the sound was
Yeah.
okay and everything.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
amazing
no,
when, when technology works, it works.
I know, right? When it works, it works.
Yeah.
Okay, my goodness.
Okay. Let me just open that again. There we go. And I'll just leave it on that first page.
Awesome. I'll cue the camera on this side because you don't need to see the camera. You'll have a
Yeah, I'll
Nice.
kill my camera at some point as well. We're quite early. For once in my life, I'm actually early.
well, same here. I was in another meeting and I excused myself in time. I'm like proud of myself.
Yeah, no, it's still early. So
Oh,
now you can chill and check your emails, although your laptop's being used, so you
yes,
don't even
yeah,
have that to-
I pick it on my phone, but that's not going to work. No, I'm a
So
student
Neil,
now. So
while we've got a few minutes, how was your holiday?
oh, it was awesome. No, it was
probably
awesome.
feels like so long ago now.
It really does. It feels like decades ago. It feels like decades ago, but it was really awesome.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I ended up working more than I planned. I didn't read anything, but I ended up
Neil.
I ended up networking with a whole bunch of people. So
but
it was
that's
actually
good.
oh, it was by accident. So yeah, so I've been talking ChatGPT with them since I think about the
Good.
23rd of December. Yeah. So
Oh, excellent.
no. So super interesting. Super
Very
interesting.
interesting. And do you
Yeah,
think that's now the direction of that's the part of the PhD,
Oh,
obviously?
yes. No, definitely.
I mean, it really has changed as well. It has the potential to change assessment as we know it, unless we want to carry on just doing the same old, and pretending that we don't notice that computers are right.
No, we can ostrich it, but I don't think it's going to work. We can try and be an ostrich, but I don't think it'll work. Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting, and I'm even thinking about what does it mean for postgraduate work as well. So,
sure.
and that's just something that nobody's talking about at the moment.
No, for sure.
Every seminar, every talk I go to, everybody's very much worried about first year and second year.
And they're
and then
worried about
maybe
that.
third.
They're worried about that because so much of our undergraduate assessment is show me that you've read the stuff. And now
Exactly.
they can show you that they've read the stuff without reading the stuff. But
Yes.
of course, at postgraduate level, knowledge creation, I mean, I guess that's where ChatGPT falls down, as it's not good at creating new stuff. But maybe it'll save postgrads a bit of time. I don't know.
Yes, I think definitely time. I mean, you saw the thing that Mag shared. I don't know if you looked at that, researcher.life. I mean, for finding literature. it's
Exactly.
amazing.
Yes.
It's amazing. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff where you can chuck the stuff into and it can tell you what is good and what's bad. And, would I trust it? I'm not sure. But will it help me?
And this is what I think is most interesting. I think that what we need, and it's a separate issue from assessment, but what are universities doing around the ethics of it all? And I'm not talking academic integrity there. I'm talking about, so I think you've probably seen some of the medical reports it puts together, that it sometimes just makes references.
Oh no, it lies.
So,
like
and it
some
just
people
lies.
explain it like hallucinations. It hallucinates it.
Yeah. Shame, did you see it told that one guy that he must get divorced?
Yes, yeah. and leave his wife for the AI.
And then the other thing it does, which most people think is a good thing, but I'm not convinced, is it decides when a topic is taboo and it won't write about it.
Yes. Yeah, so that's hard-coded. That's hard-coded from their testing, right?
Exactly. So that's a person who's hard-coded it, not to come up with how to develop the best bomb, or how to, So but I'm not sure that we should trust what counts as academic freedom in the hands of a couple of programmers.
Exactly. It's only as good as the data it's trained on, right? And and I mean, a lot of that data is already filtered out. So a lot of the trawlers that they use would look at anything that's openly available, and that includes a lot of academic work, because we know there's a lot of space where you can find pirated stuff. So that would trawl all of those documents and add that to the 800 trillion words it's got. But I mean, that's only 540 gig. I mean, if we look at the total size of the internet, we're talking, trillions of gigabytes. So, we're basing a lot on a very little.
On a relatively small, that's interesting.
Yes. And then let's not even talk about possibility for bias that it has got. With this little data that's already cleaned up by humans, it's still got a lot of bias in it. So the moment we release it to the internet, that's when we start seeing all this funny behavior,
Exactly. And I wonder, and I wonder if they hard-coded ChatGPT to not be allowed to write on certain topics, why didn't they hard-code it to not be allowed to make up references or to make up data?
So, and this is where the problem comes in. So this thing becomes like a mirror. So what's in the data is what we see come back. But what's mystifying is where it makes the stuff up. They don't know where that comes from.
I know. I love that. I know I shouldn't love that.
Consequence. Yes.
And then of course, it becomes as biased or racist or sexist as the internet. So and I hear people say, but it's machine learning, so it's just totally objective, just bringing together words and bringing together references. But it's bringing together biased words and references. So.
No, definitely. I mean, there was a jailbreak version of it where somebody took the API and got it to take a larger part of the internet. And I think it took them, Microsoft had a Tweetbot a while ago. It was called,
and they had to shut it down.
And this jailbreak was as well. It had the foulest mouth, and it was totally racist.
And it took less than a day for it to turn from a supposedly objective harvester of knowledge into a Hitler worshipping sexist. I saw that.
Yeah.
Oh, we are sad. So our machines are sad. Oh goodness.
You gotta love it. You gotta love it.
Welcome to those people who are joining us. Neil and I are just chatting while we are waiting to get going. So just we are colleagues, but we never see each other. So it's a good opportunity to catch up. I'm sure that the others in the room have also been reading and thinking a lot about this whole ChatGPT. I've had great fun playing with it. I don't know if the rest of you have, if anyone else has played around with it. It is quite fun. I've been asking it to write poems in different styles. And that's quite interesting to see how it can mimic Sylvia Plath or E.E. Cummings or whatever you like. The more I'm amused by it, the more I'm a little bit terrified by it too. We've still got a good few minutes to start. So well done to the early birds. It will apparently catch the worm, although I'm not sure that you want worms, but anyway.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Benson. How are you?
Very well, and how are you?
Yeah, I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Good to have you with us.
As my first interface with road staff
Okay.
and colleagues.
Yeah, you are so welcome. I'm glad to have you with us. I hope it's an interesting session for you.
Yeah,
We are talking ethics and integrity.
yeah, quite critical.
It is quite critical. I'm not, unfortunately, we were just chatting about ChatGPT, and I'm not unfortunately talking about that today. But I know that our EdTech colleagues have been running some various conversations around that. And a couple of us have published a couple of pieces. I think a few of us have got a piece coming out in the conversation tomorrow. So we've certainly been thinking about it, but I have to admit, I haven't updated this presentation to kind of include that consideration. Perhaps I should have. Never mind. Welcome to you all. It is 1 minute to 4, so I am going to wait another minute before we get started. Or actually, Asipe is chairing today's session, and I'm just chatting away. I suppose I should hand over to Asipe, but it's still 1 minute too.
I'm gonna walk away.
Oh yeah, I can ask ChatGPT to do that for me. I can ask ChatGPT to add a section on the ethics around ChatGPT. Good idea. Get the machine to critique itself. I've actually read an essay someone did on that exact topic. It's very interesting. And I saw a very interesting spoof that Tom Eaton just posted on Facebook, where he asked, I think it was Tom Eaton, asked ChatGPT to talk about Eskom. And it was, we didn't come off very well, and let's just say.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us again. Those who are joining in the physical venue, as well as those who are joining us online. Just a bit of housekeeping. Please make sure that you sign the register before leaving. I have 3 copies that are roaming around, I think one that side. Please make sure that you sign the register. And also please move the register along. And a warm welcome for those who are entering right now. And today we are having a session which is still under our short course on orientation for postgraduate students. The topic for today is unethical research through ages, which will be presented by Sue McKenna, who will take us through what it means to do ethical research and what it means to be accountable to the public as you are undergoing your research journey. She is joining us online, so this will be projecting today's presentation. Just make sure that you go to the RU Connect page for the recordings, those who are registered to the short course, but also those who are not registered for the short course on RU Connect can actually get the recordings on YouTube. So I've been receiving so many queries regarding recordings. They're available on our YouTube page, the Center for Postgraduate Studies at Rhodes University, as well as on RU Connect. Without wasting any time, allow me to introduce to you again, Professor Sue McKenna. Over to you, Sue.
Thanks, Asipe, and thank you everybody for joining us online or in person. I'm sorry that I am still not with you in person. I am hoping to be, I'm back on campus for an hour or two a day at the moment, but I'm really hoping to be back on campus full time in the very near future. I'm going to turn off my camera so that you don't have to look at my face and you can rather look at the slides. Today, we're going to be talking about unethical research through the ages. I'm going to be talking about some examples of unethical research. Most of them, I think many of you will already know about. So these are examples with which I think many of you will be familiar, but I'm hoping that they will not just be here to shock and scandalize us, but to get us to think a little bit more deeply about what ethics means in research and where this whole notion of having ethical clearance as a fundamental part of research and of our universities, where does that all come from? Now, before I get started with me rabbiting on about all the examples I'm going to share with you today, I'd like you to consider two questions. The first question is, what do you think are the key ethical issues that you have to engage with in your research? Perhaps you're already halfway through your research. What are the things you've had to think through in order to ensure that you are behaving ethically and that your research is ethical? So what are the key issues? And what does it mean for you as a researcher to be ethical? So your research project needs to be ethical, and you need to be an ethical researcher. What do those things mean for you or your field? I'm going to ask us just to have a conversation in the room. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Asipe and Neil to silence me. It is now 4:04, and we're going to have a 10-minute conversation. So the people in the room, you will chat to each other, put up your hand, share your views on these two questions. Neil and Asipe will chair the session for you guys to have a conversation about which ethical issues are pertinent to your research and what does it mean to be an ethical researcher. And then the people that are joining me online, I'm going to ask you to just put up your hand, and I will then ask you to unmic yourself. I'll call your name out if you put up your hand, and unmic yourself and share your views. So for 10 minutes, you're going to silence us, and we'll go into two separate rooms, one physical room that Asipe will chair and one virtual room that I will chair. So Asipe, I'm going to turn off my sound now for 10 minutes. Thank you. Okay, to those who remain with me online, you can see the questions on your screen. There are no model answers here. There's no perfect solution. If you'd rather type your response into the chat, you're welcome to do so. But I'd like to hear some voices today instead of just hearing my own. So I'm really hoping that some of you will be brave enough to put up your hand and just tell us what jumps into your head when you think about being an ethical researcher and doing ethical research. And yay, Yusra, for starting us off. Let's hear from you, Yusra.
I thought, let me be brave. So I think I'm not in any way doing research at the moment. It's something that I still have to plan, but I do have a method or way of doing research that I want to do, which is I guess to run storytelling workshops, because that's kind of what I do in general. And I guess in terms of the key ethical issues that I would have to engage with, so I think for one is access. So having access to, I guess, students, because that's kind of what I want to do my research with, just around their own ideas of what skills and basic skills they feel they're supposed to have in order to participate in their education. And in a workshop setting, and especially around storytelling, you are asking people around their personal lives. You are asking people to participate in different kinds of art, like mediums. So I'm a big fan of pastels and flip charts. And so I think the things that spring to mind are the things that I would deal with in general in workshops is, making sure that if you're working with a group of people, that there's a code of conduct that we establish together. That a lot of the process of doing work together is that ensuring that everyone feels equally accountable and also able to speak at any point, that if things feel a little bit too difficult to share, because I don't think anybody should take for granted that their topic will not have any sensitive stories that people would share. And so, yeah, those are the couple of things that spring to mind, is how I need to make sure that I am able to listen and give feedback in a way that would encourage people to continue participating, but also to let them know that when doing the research with me, that at the end of the day, they can leave and come back, or they can leave for good. And so I think it's more around making sure that I can mediate sensitively, considerately, how people take part in the research I want to do with them.
Thanks, Yusra. You've raised all sorts of issues around selection, participation, trustworthiness, respect. Let's hear from Benson.
Yeah, thank you very much. Adding to what was raised, two issues to raise. One, I think, is the whole question of confidentiality. I think is important in your research. And the last one relates to anonymity of the participants in your study. Those are the two submissions I wanted to make. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Yeah, two very important concepts that are often actually confused with each other. Anonymity, that you will anonymize the person so that the reader of the text or the viewer of the video or whatever your final research product is won't be able to identify the individuals. You've anonymized them. And then confidentiality. Are there things that your participants might tell you that you will not include in the research? In other words, you'll keep it confidential, means you'll keep it a secret. So, that there may be things that they tell you off the record, so to speak. Thanks for that. Thulisile, would you like to add some comments?
Yes, the participants, if it's human participants, they should know that they are being researched and they should consent to the research.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Thulisile. You've said it so simply, and it just sounds like such a simple thing, but it's such a complicated thing, isn't it? Those two words, informed consent. Consent is to willingly agree to something, but you can't willingly agree to something if you are not fully informed of what it is you're agreeing to. So both of those words are equally important. It's not just, has someone signed my piece of paper so I can get on with my research. It has someone really understood what it means for them in order to say that, yes, they want to be part of this. Thanks for that. Mabato, would you like to add something?
Much. I think one other issue that we should consider all the time is voluntary participation is very key. And then the other factor that we need to take into consideration is confidentiality. That means whoever that you talk to should be willing to participate. At the same time, promise that person whichever information that is given you is in the right hands, so that that person will be willing to go to participate. The other factor that I think we should talk about is about continued communication between the two parties. Being factual all the time, being accurate to the person that you talk to all the time, so that at least he or she earns your trust.
Yeah, absolutely. And this thing about being ongoing communication is a really neglected one. I think most researchers, including human research, where you're working with people, we kind of go and we get the data and we walk away. And so we might expend a lot of energy trying to build up rapport, build up trust to get nice, rich data, but that's it. That's the end of the relationship. And I think that's where a lot of the complaints about university research comes from. Communities who feel, you know, you just use us, you come here, you get us our data so that you can get a degree or you can get a research paper, but you don't communicate back to us. You don't tell us what the findings were. You don't give us ideas of how to move forward. You take and you don't, there's no reciprocity there. You didn't even check that the ways in which you've made sense of this echoes our meaning making. So I think those are really vital ideas that you've shared there. This idea that it's not a once-off, it's actually a relationship. And that's really hard, especially I have to say at postgraduate level, where often our students are under enormous pressure to move on. Now you're in the data collection phase, get in there, get the data, move on, write the chapter. And we don't, I think, spend enough time talking with our students about what does it mean to genuinely forge a relationship and genuinely care for your participants and work with them. And I think we are inclined to take all sorts of shortcuts. Has anyone else got a comment before we go back to the main room? Let's hear from one other person. One other brave soul. Oh, nobody else willing to talk? Okay, well, hopefully you've had a chance to think through these two questions. Oh, there we go, Esther. Yay, well done, Esther. Let's hear from you.
Yeah, let me try to be brave too. Okay, one thing that I'm reflecting back on my master's study is to understand the views and the feelings of the participants. For example, like, in other words, to understand their willingness to participate in the study, and to be careful not to try to convince the participant to be part of your study, but then it's of course as like the other like who was that who alluded to the point that we need to,
I think it was Mabato spoke about voluntary.
To explain to them thoroughly what the study entails. Some of the studies are so complex, they have a lot of activities. Mine was an interventionist, meaning that it has a lot of engagement with the participants, and it took a little bit of time. And then the concept or the willingness, their willingness to participate was key there. And also to take ownership of, and then when they become willing, they also have this sense of wanting to take ownership of their study. And from my side, I saw it that they were treating it as if it was even their own, trying to give suggestions here and there. But then those ones that were in as if they were persuaded by the others, my participants, like by the other participants, I saw along the line that they pulled out at the very early stage. And that is when,
Thanks, Esther. Yeah, this whole idea of what does it mean to be truly a voluntary participant, especially when there are power dynamics at play. And as you say, if people don't voluntarily participate, especially if it's a complex study, they're unlikely to commit to the whole part of it. The issue that you raised about participants actually taking ownership of the study and feeling that it was their study too, of course, brings up a number of other ethical issues around publications and whose name goes on the publications. I believe we are back in the main room again. So I hope you had as useful a conversation in the venue as we did online. I'm now going to take us through a couple of examples. I've got, I think, 3 case studies from around the world through history. I'm not sure if you'll have time to go through all 3. And then I've got 2 case studies from South Africa that hopefully will provoke us to think in novel ways about what it means to do ethical research and to be an ethical researcher. And I want to keep emphasizing that distinction. It's one thing to do ethical research, but have you become an ethical researcher? In other words, in all your planning, implementation, and dissemination of your research, are you always considering ethical matters? The first case study I'm going to share with you today, you may well be familiar with, and this is around the medical doctors of Nazi Germany. So as you know, in the Second World War, 1939 to 1945, under Nazi rulership, Hitler as the head of Germany, there was the mass Holocaust of a number of groups of people, in particular Jewish people, Romani gypsies, homosexuals, and anyone with any kind of physical disability. And these, alongside this Holocaust, there was also a number of a great deal of medical research taking place. I'm going to show you a 4-minute video now. Just please be warned that some of the footage is quite upsetting. Some of the footage in this little video is taken from films that have been made about the period, but some of the footage is actual footage from the period. It's only 4 minutes long, so you're welcome to just turn off the sound for 4 minutes or whatever you may choose to do. And I also just want to apologize. I got this off the internet and I found the voiceover a little bit, yay, it's so exciting over the most awful video. So anyway, that is what it is. I'm going to take us into the video now. I'm hoping that it will play without a problem in the venue and for those of you online. It's 4 minutes long.
The concentration camps operated by the Nazis will forever be remembered as one of the most shameful displays of human cruelty in history. Starvation, forced labor, physical abuse, and the risk of execution were all daily realities in the camps. But at Buchenwald, prisoners were also used as guinea pigs for research. Among the most notorious were the incendiary experiments carried out between 1943 and 1944. These experiments involved intentionally exposing prisoners to severe white phosphorus burns in order to better understand the nature of the wounds caused by incendiary bombs, as well as evaluate their effectiveness of various treatments. White phosphorus, if you're wondering, results in chemical burns capable of eating down to the bone.
On the average, we would dispatch 2,000 people a day.
Testing the resilience of a human body without consent, however, is torture, and that's just what the Nazis did. In Dachau, the scientists purposefully froze Jewish and Russian prisoners to the point where they passed out or died to better educate themselves on cold weather before pushing the Eastern Front. They also studied the effects of being at high altitudes using pressure chambers, as well as trying to make seawater drinkable, both of which reportedly killed most subjects.
They performed experiments, painful often, on the children consigned to death.
And saw their prisoner populations as opportunities to study infectious illnesses in a controlled environment in order to develop treatments. The various experiments were carried out in both the aforementioned Dachau and Buchenwald concentration camps, as well as Sachsenhausen, Natzweiler, and Neuengamme. The inoculations included such deadly diseases as epidemic jaundice or infectious hepatitis, tuberculosis, malaria, typhoid fever, yellow fever, and typhus, and unsurprisingly claimed countless lives. If there's one evil Nazi scientist whose name has etched its way into the mainstream, it's Dr. Josef Mengele. An SS officer, Mengele was one of the leading medical minds of the Third Reich. After having requested a transfer to a concentration camp, Mengele took up his post as chief physician of Auschwitz, where he sent thousands of prisoners to their death in the gas chambers. It was here that he performed his inhumane genetic experiments, including his research on twins. Amputations, intentional introduction of disease, and unnecessary blood transfusions were all just a few of the techniques he employed. He was never captured. Though the Nazi concept of purity led them to persecute many groups, including the disabled, homosexuals, people of color, Slavics, Roma gypsies, and more, the Jews were the primary target. So strong were the anti-Semitic views that an anatomist at the Reich University of Strasbourg, August Hirt, actually developed a project known as the Jewish Skeleton Collection in order to scientifically validate the eugenic effort of the regime. The bodies were to be dissected, studied, and ultimately preserved as skeletons, but thankfully the course of the war changed and Hurt committed suicide before he and his colleagues could complete their gruesome work. The concentration...
Oops, definitely don't want to watch that again. So there you have it. It is certainly a shocking story, and that really is only a short introduction to it. But I would like to point out a few things for us to consider. You might say that's ancient history, it's appalling, it's atrocious, it's got nothing to do with us. But I'd like to point out that Dr. Mengele, Dr. Wirtz, Dr. Heim, and a number of others who were leading these so-called scientific research projects all had university qualifications. A number of them had medical degrees, and a number of them had PhDs, had doctorates, and they all had very extensive scientific research expertise. They were used to writing grant proposals, writing proposals for the higher degrees committee or the equivalent thereof, ascertaining who would participate in their studies, dividing people into an experimental group and a control group. They fully understood the scientific method. They were highly educated people. So these were the same people that were doing all those things that you just witnessed. So what I'd like you to do now is I'm only going to give you 3 minutes to do this, and no one's going to read what you've written, but I'd like you to spend a bit of time thinking. I'll give you 3 minutes to think what your answer is about these questions. Now, for me, as an academic, thinking and writing generally go hand in hand. And I find if I scribble my ideas as I think them, they often really help me to go a bit deeper. And I'd like to, that's something that I really, and you'll have seen that in the videos in this course, something I really try and get people used to doing is when you're trying to think through a concept in your research, in your studies, you spend a lot of time scribbling little notes to yourself. So we're going to practice that now. Open a new page on your book or your exam pad or on a new Word document. And just for 3 minutes, try and see what comes up as you reflect on this question that's on the screen. What went wrong with these doctors' university educations that they were able to use their high-level expertise to such inhumane ends? 3 minutes starting now. Okay, your time is up. I've probably interrupted you mid-flow, just as you were getting to some really deep thinking on these issues. I apologize for that. But I hope that some of your thinking around this touches on the first real point I'd like to make today. And that is that if you have knowledge and you think that that knowledge is very neutral and objective, you're just learning about the geological strata, or you're learning about different chemical formulations. If you think of knowledge as purely external and objective, then I urge you to think again. Because of that initial question I asked, it's not just undertaking research in ethical ways, it's being an ethical researcher. You can have lots of knowledge and skills, as Dr. Mengele and the rest of them had, but if you don't have a notion of yourself as an ethical person committed to the public good, and instead you adopt very unethical ideological positions, then it's very possible to use research for bad rather than good. So this is an extreme example that I've just given you of someone using their research expertise to undertake completely inhumane practices. Let me give you a quick up-to-date example, which is not as extreme, but which happened in the last 2 years. Around the world, there was an absolutely massive endeavor to come up with a vaccine for COVID, as you are all aware. And very quickly, a couple of companies came up with a vaccine for COVID, almost simultaneously. That vaccine was developed by their research and development departments of these massive multinational pharmaceutical companies, but it was also driven to a very large extent by researchers employed in universities. So there was incredible collaboration, a very positive ethical picture of people collaborating, university professors collaborating with these multinational pharmaceutical companies to address a global problem, and they did so incredibly quickly. So where's the downside of all of that? Well, the downside is that those academics who worked for the universities were paid very well by those pharmaceutical companies to bring their knowledge and expertise to those laboratories. And then those pharmaceutical companies, they almost simultaneously, 2 big companies came up with a vaccine almost at the same time. Those companies made sure that their formulas for those vaccines were patented, copyrighted, so to speak, and were not available to the public. And so countries around the world had to spend a great deal of money or borrow money or ask for assistance from organizations that support such things to be able to afford the vaccine. There was some public outcry, but the public outcry came from the public and not from the academics who'd earned the fat amount of money. So there's perhaps a less controversial example, but I think, again, an example of researchers using their incredible expertise for personal gain, even while knowing that if those formulas were made immediately public, which in the end we have seen that there was some resolution, a lot of money changed hands before there was resolution, but we don't see those academics saying, yes, I'll bring my expertise to you, but there has to be some kind of agreement that this will be, that you'll tap your profits at 5%, or you will provide this vaccine to countries with certain GDPs. There was no negotiation around ethical use of their knowledge. They simply said, what, you want to pay me a few $1 million? I'm on board. Okay, moving on. So that was just a quick up-to-date example. Let's move on to the next example. The next example I'm going to give you is about the Tuskegee experiment. And that experiment is also started. Sorry, I'm just quickly WhatsApping Neil. There we go. That Tuskegee experiment started back in 1932 And you're going to watch a 5-minute video about it now. It's named the Tuskegee experiment because it started in the little town of Tuskegee in the USA. Can I ask people online if they can just mute themselves, please? The Tuskegee, thank you. The Tuskegee experiment went all the way up till 1972. Now, for those of you sitting in the room, perhaps that seems like a very, very long time ago. But as someone who was already, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old in 1972, I can tell you that was just the other day. So I'm going to show you this quick little 5-minute video about the Tuskegee experiment.
In the 1930s, the United States was ravaged by syphilis. This sexually transmitted infection afflicted nearly 1 in 10 Americans, producing painful sores and rashes that persisted for roughly 2 years. After these initial symptoms, late-stage syphilis was known to cause organ damage, heart and brain disorders, and even blindness. It was incredibly difficult to slow the disease's spread. Experts cautioned against unprotected sex, but the infection could also be passed during childbirth. Worse still, existing treatments like mercury and bismuth were considered unreliable at best and potentially harmful at worst. Today, these heavy metals are classified as toxic, but at the time, doctors were still uncovering their dangerous side effects. Amidst the uncertainty, healthcare professionals had 2 key questions. Did late-stage syphilis warrant the risks of existing treatments? And did the infected individual's race change how the disease progressed? Many physicians were convinced syphilis affected the neurological systems of white patients and the cardiovascular systems of Black patients. There was little evidence for this. The town had already possessed a small hospital, and the area was home to a large population of potential participants. The PHS collaborated with local doctors and nurses to recruit roughly 400 Black men, presumed to have non-contagious late-stage syphilis, as well as 200 non-syphilitic Black men for their control group. But their recruitment plan centered on a lie. While the researchers planned to observe how syphilis would progress with minimal treatment, participants were told they would receive free drugs and care for their condition. At first, researchers gave the men existing treatments, but these were soon replaced with placebos. Under the false pretense of providing a special remedy, researchers performed painful and invasive spinal taps to investigate the disease's neurological consequences. When patients died, the PHS would swoop in to study the body by funding funerals in exchange for autopsies. In their published studies, they listed the men as volunteers to obscure the circumstances under which they'd been recruited. Outside Alabama, syphilis treatment was advancing. A decade after the study began, clinical trials confirmed that penicillin effectively cured the disease in its early stages. But in Tuskegee, researchers were determined to keep pursuing what they considered vital research. They had yet to confirm their theories about racial difference, and they believed they would never have another opportunity to observe the long-term effects of untreated syphilis. The study's leadership decided to withhold knowledge of new treatments from their subjects. During World War II, researchers convinced the local draft board to exempt men from their study, preventing them from enlisting and potentially accessing penicillin. The study even continued through the 1950s, when penicillin was shown to help manage late-stage syphilis. By today's bioethical standards, withholding treatment in a research study without a patient's informed consent is morally abhorrent. But for a large part of the 20th century, this practice was not uncommon. In the 1940s, U.S.-led studies in Guatemala infected numerous prisoners, sex workers, soldiers, and mental health patients with sexually transmitted infections to study potential treatments. And other studies throughout the 50s and 60s saw doctors secretly infecting patients with viral hepatitis and even cancer cells. Eventually, researchers began objecting to these unjust experiments. In the late 1960s, an STI contact tracer named Peter Buxton convinced the PHS to consider ending the study. But after leadership decided against it, Buxton sent his concerns to the press. In July of 1972, an expose of the Tuskegee study made headlines across the country. Following public outcry, a federal investigation, and a lawsuit, the study was finally shut down in 1972, 40 years after it began, and 30 after a treatment for syphilis had been found. No evidence of any racial difference was discovered. When the study ended, only 74 of the original 600 men were alive. 40 of their wives and 19 of their children had contracted syphilis, presumably from their husbands and fathers. In the wake of this tragedy and concerns about similar experiments, Congress passed new regulations for ethical research and informed consent. But systemic racism continues to permeate medical care and research throughout the U.S. To truly address these issues, the need for structural change, better access to care, and transparency in research remains urgent.
Okay, another really shocking tale, and you can certainly read more about the Tuskegee experiments if you would choose to do so. But as with the Nazi experiments, what we see here is a clearly educated group of people following all sorts of principles around scientific research, but somehow being able to justify to themselves that this entirely abhorrent and inhumane behavior was acceptable. And again, it's an extreme example. I would like to think that none of you will face any such ethical dilemmas, but I think the underpinning issues remain pertinent. What we have here is, in both of those case studies, is an ability by these scientists to group a certain group of people and see them as less human. So immediately there's an ideological problem with their approach. There is not there's no informed consent. So there's no consent at all in the first case, the Nazi case, and in the second case where people did sign certain forms, it was not informed consent. And in both cases, there is supposedly a desire to build scientific knowledge. And this is what I want to stress to you, because people often look at these cases and all they can see, understandably, is how absolutely hideously evil they are. And they are hideously evil. But what's important to note is that in both of these cases and in many other cases, there would be conversations and reports written and papers disseminated, which the scientists believed were contributing to the field. So following research processes is not enough. Now, luckily, since then, we've got all sorts of ethical charters that tell us things like you've got to have informed consent, or for those of you who are working in the natural sciences and not with people, there are all sorts of charters that ask us to consider how we dispose of toxic chemicals, how we will work with, where we will work with them, and so on. So we have got these charters in place now that should guide our behavior. But I'm of the view, and this is perhaps the second point I'd really like to emphasize, that having a set of charters and procedures and principles is well and good, and probably is well and good. But if we don't have deep internal reflection about what we're doing and what we're doing it for, it will be very easy for us to be swayed. My example of the academics who worked on the COVID vaccine for great personal gain and didn't prevent it being a private good is a very up-to-date example of someone who's using their absolutely cutting-edge research on something that is good for the planet, and yet the way it was done meant that it became a private good. In other words, good for the people who got the money for doing it, and good for the people who could afford to have access to it, but not good for the general public of the world. I'm going to have to leave out this next, the next, I've said that. I'm going to leave out the next case study because I'm wanting to have more time to chat, and I want to move on to some South African examples. So this is just another example, the Milgram experiment. I'm not going to show you the video, but trying to find out whether people respond when they're told that they have to do something. Are they willing to obey orders, even if those orders go against their own moral code? I'm going to jump that video. And in the case of the Milgram experiment, the poor people who participated actually ended up with post-traumatic stress disorder. And if we look back at the data, we'll see that the data was presented in a way that demonstrated kind of the assumptions of the researchers. And in modern day researchers who go back and look at that data say, well, actually, that's not the full picture of what happened. And that's another big issue around being ethical with your research. Are you seeing what you want to see in the data? Are you perhaps only selecting little bits of data that support your perspective? Or are you genuinely open to being surprised and having your worldviews critiqued? The Milgram experiment is a good example of that. And there are many other examples which we could have chosen about. So what I'm going to ask you to do now is just to chat to the person next to you, about those that are in the room, chat to the person next to you for 10 minutes about the more commonplace ethical issues that you might need to consider in your research. I'm just seeing, I didn't sort out breakaway rooms earlier. I think I might have to apologize for that. For those people who are in together, we'll do the same thing as before. We'll just ask people to raise their hands. So what I'm asking about is breaches of ethics or things that can go wrong in the ethics in your research. Today, we just looked at 2 scenarios, 3 if you count the COVID one, of serious breaks in people behaving in ethical ways. Researchers who are at the top of their game in terms of their knowledge, but who behave in appalling ways in terms of their humanity. Those are extreme cases. What are less extreme cases, more commonplace ethical problems, ethical dilemmas that emerge in your research? 10 minutes. I wonder, Asipe or Neil, I wonder if you can silence me. It's 4:45. If you can silence me until 4:55, and you guys can chat. You might want to just, chat in smaller groups, chat to the person next to you, because that way more people in the room get to have a conversation. So chat to the person next to you. And those who are remaining with me, we'll have our conversation as before. Thanks, Neil. Okay, so we've been silenced. So we just stay here. I'm sorry I didn't organize breakout groups, and I'm not the host. So I can't quickly put you into breakout groups, which would allow more people to talk. But I'd really like to hear from you. Examples of ethical dilemmas or breaches of ethics in your field or in your own research. And let's hear from some people we haven't heard from before. Any examples of things that can go wrong in the kinds of research done in your field, things that have gone wrong, dilemmas that confront you? I'm going to hope that some brave people, let's hear from some different people, some brave people put up their hands. Again, there are no right or wrong answers. While I'm waiting for those brave people that I'm sure are just about to put up their hands, one of the things that we often don't talk about in terms of research ethics is dissemination of the research. We talk about collecting the data and analyzing the data. We don't talk about where we publish the data. There are lots of ethical issues around that. Predatory publications, the cost of international publications, the charges that they have, the number of retractions. I don't know if you follow a website called Retraction Watch, but you'll see that the number of articles that have to be pulled and apologies written because it was fake data, or claims that were made that were much bigger than the data allowed for. Retraction Watch, even very highly regarded journals that have very rigorous peer review systems are increasingly having to retract, it's called retract articles. So if you go to that article, instead of seeing the article, you just see a message saying this article was retracted on whatever day because of this reason. And if you go to the website Retraction Watch, you'll find some of the reasons. And you'll also see the scary graphs to see how more common this is becoming. Now I'm just going to be quiet and hope that someone puts their hands into the void. Yay, Mishka, thank you.
Thanks, Sue. I don't know if you can hear me.
Can hear you perfectly.
Okay, perfect. Hello, everybody. Hi, Sue. Good afternoon. I think we've really covered some of the obvious ones, but something interesting that came up actually last week was this question around in higher education studies research, and especially within the context of the participant's voice, this thematic analysis critique as being potentially self-imposing ideas, especially related to qualitative research, self-imposing ideas through these themes. And an example that came up was of this research that was a digital storytelling piece that had young people describe, I guess, their childhood. I'm sorry, I didn't read the article. I'm just sharing what had come up. I just thought it was an interesting thing that might relate to this. And this theme of the missing father. Yet in the context of a place like South Africa, we have very diverse family structures. And this missing father is a very Eurocentric, like European trope. But that came up as a real theme, if you are to apply that lens. So I think even in analysis, this question of like, when are you imposing your lens, your view on the data itself, there's a question around ethics there in representing what gets said, given the context that research is done in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We look at the data through our own eyes, and we are, socialized politically, historically, culturally, and so on, into particular ways of seeing the world. And those are the ways which we bring to the data. Now, of course, in many humanities and social sciences, the argument goes that we need to use a strong theory to allow us to look at that data in more powerful ways, and not just to rely on our biased, prejudiced, common sense lenses, our own eyes. We put on these glasses, these lenses, these spectacles, this theoretical way of seeing the world. And I buy that to a large extent. I do think in humanities and social science, we do need explicit theory that forces us to look beyond our own ways of seeing the world. But I think Mishka points out that it's a lot more than that, because even your theory can be a set of blinkers, especially if you are working in a group where everyone's using the same theory. So you all become, yay, this is the way to understand the world. You're all doing the same readings. One of the things I urge my students to do is find the critiques of your theory, find the critiques of the themes. Mishka brought up the idea of themes. Try and find the research that disagrees with you. And I think that can be quite a challenge to do. Yeah, to me, but it's a challenge to do, but it's worth doing. And the other thing is to try and find a critical reader who is not like you. Tati, your mic is undone, so I'm going to ask you, Tati. Oh, you turned it off. I was going to say, as soon as your mic is undone, don't you want to share with us an ethical dilemma from your field? Or do you have anything to share? I was hoping you'd unmuted yourself because you had some words of wisdom for us. Just to put you on the spot. No? Anyone else? I have a theory on this. I'm not sure how well backed this by data. Okay. Let's hear. Oh, we seem to keep losing Tati, because that sounded interesting. Yeah, so the issue of theoretical lenses. Any other examples? We've got a couple of minutes. I'm hoping we'll have one more brave soul. I do think that sharing online is really tough, even after our 2 years of COVID. When you're sitting in a room in a small group, it just feels so much easier to jump in and have something to say. I'm going to jump on someone I know. I'm going down the list, finding someone I know. Kirsten, are you there?
I had a feeling that would happen, Sue.
Yeah.
There's something I was thinking of, again, from higher education studies, is the topics we tend to look at can often be on sort of sensitive issues. We often look at teaching and learning topics in higher education. Are we providing students with access to knowledge? What kind of knowledge? Where are we letting them down? We look at topics to do with quality assurance, quality enhancement. Are universities actually providing quality education? So, you know, when you start digging, sometimes you can find things that were a bit unexpected, and some of those unexpected findings can be very positive, but they can also be quite negative. So for me, an ethical dilemma is how do you grapple with the negative findings that might come out of your research, particularly if you're doing insider research and you might be casting your own context or your own workplace or your own teaching or a colleague's teaching in a negative light. Something from our field.
No, thanks, Kirsten. Absolutely. It's the kind of data that can hurt. And you gave us a good example in higher education studies, but I think it can be common in a lot of different studies. You can get data that can actually feel a bit hurtful, and yet you need to be true to that data. So that's quite a challenge. Mabato, thank you. What would you like to share?
Thank you so much. I wanted to allude to what the previous speakers have said regarding the issues of confidentiality. So I was going to bring the aspect of technology, the respect of technology and privacy. How do we go about it, especially when you are dealing with the science research, whereby there are some issues that you need to uncover or to discover. So I think that's is a question. We have seen with the case studies that we have just looked at now, that issue regarding privacy was not taken into consideration. So how do we go about it?
Absolutely. And the world changed.
Sorry for that. I think we should always be cognizant of what kind of research that you are engaging on to understand better what are the ethical considerations that we have to put up with. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mabato. Absolutely. And so the examples, you know, may come from particular fields, but there's no field that doesn't have some kind of ethical dilemmas. I definitely think some research methodologies, some fields, some research questions have far more ethical dilemmas to be grappled with and need a higher level of reflexivity, which means reflection plus action. So you reflect deeply and you act. I do think that might be the case that some fields need that more substantially, but there's not a single field that doesn't have some kind of ethical issue that needs to be considered. Oh, Tulisile, I see your hand is up. Our time is up. I think there's time. I think we are going to come back, Tulisile, to one more group before we finish today. So I'm going to start with you in our next round, Tulisile. And I think we are back. Yes, we are back with everyone. I hope you had a good conversation there to try and bring these worst case scenarios down to the real world of here and now, and to remind ourselves that we do face ethical issues. One of the issues that came up in our conversation online was this idea that you can only see where you're looking and you can only see through your own eyes. So we often have the power as researchers to determine our research question. But the moment you determine a research question, the moment you set a hypothesis, you've drawn boundaries around that study, which is necessary. Otherwise, you'd be doing your master's and PhD for 20, 30, 40 years. So we have to draw boundaries around it. But the moment we draw boundaries around a research question or hypothesis, we set certain things, certain topics, certain ways of thinking, certain literature outside of that boundary. Plus, we are humans, we are biased, we are prejudiced, we are cultural, political, social people, and we look through our own eyes at the data we collect, at the way we design our research, at the way we analyze our research. We often will use theory to try and make sure we're not just bringing our common sense prejudices, all research has theory. In humanities and social science, that theory is usually very explicitly stated as a set of lenses to see the world in a particular way. In the natural sciences, typically that theory isn't really even stated. There's a general understanding about the scientific method as a theory. But theories can allow us to see things in certain ways, but they can potentially also stop us from seeing things. So again, you want to do your master's and PhD in a set period of time. So you need to choose a theory, you need to put those theoretical glasses on, you need to collect your data, you need to analyze your data, you need to get the thing written up. Those things are totally understandable. But don't, in the process of trying to get through, neglect to seek out alternative explanations for the research problem, alternative ways of looking at that research problem. Try and find the literature that contradicts what you are seeing. You might not change your mind, but actively seek out the literature. And when you find a critical reader, unless you just want someone to do spelling and grammar and proofreading, if you genuinely want a critical reader, try and get your text read by someone who you know comes from a very different ideological or theoretical position. Hard to do, but and most annoying. But I do find it very useful when I've got a couple of good colleagues that we disagree on almost everything. And I'll often ask them to read a piece. I won't necessarily do everything they suggest I do in an article before I send it off. But it's good for them to point out where they would disagree. And it forces me to be clearer on my position. So let's have a quick look at this last case study number 4, bringing it to South Africa. And we'll start off with a man who was the Vice Chancellor at Stellenbosch, the rector of Stellenbosch University. He was the rector there from 1933 to 1954, a very influential person in terms of setting Stellenbosch University in its kind of modern construction, albeit in the last few years it has undergone again significant change. But certainly for many years since he left Vice Chancellor, all the kind of systems and structures he put in place were very influential. And his main research was in developing IQ tests, intelligence quotient tests. And his thinking was that the IQ tests, which were becoming very popular at that time and were seen to be a means of establishing not only how clever someone is, but a means of establishing what they should do in society in terms of employment and so on. So certainly there was a wealth of literature around intelligence quotients tests. A lot of it has since been critiqued, but that was very, very much in the ether. In psychiatry and population, because his contention, which was a widely held contention, was that there was a cognitive difference. And you saw in the Tuskegee experiment, there was big ideas that people were it wasn't just melanin in one's skin, it was fundamental physiological differences of race groups, which of course have been utterly dismissed over and over again. But nonetheless, that was the basis on which R.C. Wilcox became a highly regarded researcher and Vice Chancellor of a university, was an attempt to prove that Africans were cognitively inferior to Europeans. His work was then taken up by, why am I not? Oh, sorry, I seem to have got stuck. His work was then taken up. I can't seem to change my slide. I don't know what I've done wrong. Let me just see. Oh, no, my entire screen is. Hopefully you can still hear me. Neil, can you still hear me?
Sue, can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you. Or I can hear you. Sue, are you still there?
I suspect we've gone into load shedding and it'll take a few minutes for her to get back.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Yes. I was about to say that exactly the message I just got. So we're changing over to another system.
Perfect.
The new world.
It's amazing how long 3 minutes takes when you're trying to change over, thanks to load shedding. That felt like about 10 minutes of me clicking buttons. And anyway, hopefully you can hear me again. And
Yes,
so I hope we didn't lose too many people. Understand completely if you did get the fed up. But what of course happened was 5 o'clock and load shedding kicked in, and I had to change over devices. But I'm back, and I will start to wrap up. So I was telling you about R.W. Wilcox, the Vice Chancellor back then at Stellenbosch University, who made his name and fame from entirely racist intelligence IQ tests. The R.W. Wilcox was one of the main buildings at Stellenbosch University until 2021, when it was renamed Kratoa, who was a Khoi woman who worked as a translator in Jan van Riebeck's time. I can't point fingers at badly named buildings. I work at Rhodes University. Okay, let me move on to Martin Lawrence Fick. And Fick is also highly cited, was highly regarded, and was considered one of South Africa's top scientists. And his work, his main text was called The Educability of the Native, but he had a number of other works. And he actually drew on Wilcox's idea of this intelligence quotients test. And in fact, his work was drawn on extensively from 1945 onwards to institutionalizing racism as a political structure in South Africa and set the scene for the apartheid government. So if we think of political movements like the apartheid government, the ideology underpinning them, don't be mistaken. They drew on racist research. They drew on published research to make their claims. And there is still a school. As I say, I work at an institution known as Rhodes, so I can't really point fingers at places that are still named after people who, in hindsight, were not so lekker. But here's just an example that there is still the school named after Fick. So he was highly regarded, was considered one of our top scientists. And yet his research was entirely geared towards ensuring the separation of race groups. And then, of course, you think, oh, well, that's all in the past, apartheid's over. Well, I don't need to tell any of you that we still have examples. Here's a retracted example. I was speaking to my group earlier about article retractions. So that's something to consider. We won't have time to discuss it today, but increasingly there are ethical issues to be discussed around knowledge dissemination. In other words, how do you get your knowledge out there? How do you publish it? Where do you publish it? Are you only publishing in the global north? Are you only publishing in journals that are so expensive most people in the global south can never read them? Are you only publishing in books that are so expensive that nobody can actually buy them or read them? Are you and are you publishing fake data? Are you publishing data where you're making claims that isn't really backed up by your data? And there's a website called Retraction Watch, which lists articles that are being retracted because of fake data, because of unscrupulous scientific methods. And Retraction Watch suggests that this problem of unethical research is actually increasing in terms of the number of publications that are having to be retracted. So this is an example of a retracted article. It's from 2020. I'm sure you remember the fuss that was made about this article in the press and so on. And basically, the real problem with this article, in my view, have I lost you again? I hope I
can hear you.
Oh, good. Thank you. The real problem with this article in many ways is the enormous assumptions it makes on the basis of a particular variable. So it's using, again, this sort of scientific method with the understanding that you can control certain variables, and then on the basis of a relationship between a variable and some other variable, you can make a hypothesis of some kind of correlation or causality. And here we saw the correlation of so-called colored women in South Africa, a small group of colored women in South Africa, and their tests. And remember, I spoke about the history of IQ tests in this country. Bear that in mind when you consider their finding that these women perform particularly badly on such neurocognitive tests. And of course, I'm sure I don't need to explain all the problems with this study. Firstly, it assumes that a small group of colored women represent all colored women. It assumes that a measure of neurocognitive test actually represents intellect. It assumes that the relationship is to the demographic of being colored and not to the demographic of access to education. It suggests unhealthy, I think you can see there in that first sentence, unhealthy lifestyle behaviors, as if these are external choices that these women make. Mishka gave an example in our group of the idea of sort of absent fathers, in a family group, and what underlying assumptions come into that. And here's another example of that. Unhealthy lifestyle behaviors, what constitutes an unhealthy lifestyle, and does one simply choose an unhealthy lifestyle, or are there some kind of sociocultural conditions which may make certain lifestyles available to different people? I suspect that this particular group of colored women weren't offered a house in Camps Bay as an alternative lifestyle. And then another article, which also made a big fuss, a very useful article in some ways. If you look at the title, we need to know why Black South Africans were less likely to consider studying biological sciences. We want to see much more diversity across all subjects, across all knowledge domains, because diversity is absolutely fundamental to that kind of knowledge creation and growth that is needed. We can't just have same people making knowledge, because we all have blinkers, we all have blind spots. So the more diversity we can have of all kinds, the more likely we are to be able to challenge each other and to grow in productive ways. So on the basis of the title, this looks like a fabulous study. However, the moment we go further, it falls apart fairly quickly. Firstly, it makes claims that the data doesn't allow it to make. So it makes claims on the, for example, of notably materialist values, experience with pets, and attitudes towards wildlife. It makes all sorts of claims about this group of people. But if you then saw that it was 211 students that they just went up to and chatted to in their lunch break. So there were all sorts of issues that this article was rightly knocked for. I think potentially there could be a really useful study here around who chooses to do which studies and why, and how we can, as universities, ensure greater diversity across all faculties and across all subjects. But that was not where this went. So I'm going to round off now and just have our last little discussion. And perhaps we'll just have a 5-minute conversation. And I just want to make a couple of points. There's a distinction between ethics and morals. So morals are about making decisions about what is right and wrong. And morals are arguably not universal. They're arguably different across different groups. I might have different morals to my partner. We hopefully share morals on most issues, but we might have different views on certain issues, for example. So morals are about decisions about what's right and wrong. Ethics are then the process whereby we try to manage that morality. So ethics are in some way the, can't find my words. Ethics, It's the operationalization of your morals. It's about saying, well, these are my views and beliefs. And then ethics is trying to say, well, how do I put that into practice? And your ethics should align with your morals. But it's really important to distinguish those issues: morals, what's right and wrong; ethics, how do I act in ways that are aligned with what I believe is right and wrong. It's very important to distinguish that from ethical clearance. Increasingly in universities, in response to the kind of terrible case studies I've shared with you today, have got ethical clearance committees. You can't go out and collect data till a committee has asked how you're collecting it, where you're collecting it, who, how you're doing the informed consent, how you're getting rid of the chemicals after you finished your experiment. How will participants be kept informed after all of those issues that ethical clearance committees engage with in order to give you the piece of paper that says, okay, we've checked your study, seems like you're good to go. That's ethical clearance. But let's go back to the questions I started with. What would it look like to undertake research that is ethical? What would it mean to be an ethical researcher? Ideally, our ethical clearance helps students and staff to engage with such deliberations. But often, like many institutional procedures, it becomes a hurdle to be jumped over. And it often becomes considered by students and supervisors as, you have to do this, you have to have this piece of paper, tick, 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 yay, I can get my ethical clearance. And I really urge us to try and resist that. And I really urge us to participate inside our own heads and in conversation with others, with deliberations about what it means to do ethical research and to be an ethical researcher. None of us are going to get it completely right, but let's try and force ourselves to engage in that and to not, often when I hear people say ethics, in fact, I would like to be so bold as to say that most times if someone at the university uses the word ethics, whether it's a student or a staff member, they are not talking about ethical behavior or ethical research, or being an ethical researcher. When they say ethics, it's a shorthand for ethical clearance. I have to get my ethics. Oh, I've got my ethics. Where's your ethics? What's your ethics number? And we need to be very careful of that. We need to be very vigilant against seeing ethics as a bureaucratic procedure rather than as part of our ongoing identity. Oops. So what I'd like to do, and we're pretty much out of time. Maybe I won't even go into the general group. Maybe I'll just ask, let's just spend 5 more minutes discussing this. Is there anything that pops into anyone's mind? If you're on the group, please just put up your hand and I'll give the mic to you. Otherwise, a CPE will let me know if there's anyone in the room who would like to share their views. But let's spend 5 minutes wrapping this session up by, let me hear from you. What are your thoughts? What's come into your mind? What do you think about what's on the last 2 bullets on this slide, or about anything we've discussed today? See, this is why I should be in that room, because I'd be staring someone down so hard that they would feel obliged to say something. I can't wait to be there. Oh, goodness me. In our chat bar, let me quickly share. In our chat bar, Judith has just shared an article, which I have not read.
Yeah, I can talk to a little bit.
Please do.
Yeah, so it's a man who's an anthropologist, I think. And it's a more kind of theoretical, philosophical piece. It's not research based, but something just raises my hackles with this. That he's saying that sort of the so-called rape culture that feminists need to back off, basically. And he kind of says that if women want things to be better, they're really not helping themselves by kind of being aggressive with men around this rape culture idea. I need help in figuring out, I mean, I understand why I react so badly to it, but I need help in figuring out whether there's an actual ethical issue here, whether, you know, or whether there's other things going on. I mean, clearly he hasn't had it read and critiqued by women, I don't think, for one thing. Yeah, so I'm really asking other people to help me figure out what exactly is going on here, and whether this is just, you know, I disagree with him and I think he's wrong, or whether there is actually some kind of ethical problem with this kind of
Judith,
extreme mansplaining.
Yeah, and I think you've really spelled out such an important distinction for us. You know, is this something that maybe raises our hackles? We disagree. It's important. It's so important for people who believe in academic freedom to fight for the right for people to have views that are different to ours. So that is really important. As I say, it's important to find the articles that actually disagree with us, because it helps us tighten our positions and express them more clearly. But then there are also examples, as we see from Retraction Watch, of just bad science, of just opinion pieces that allow the positioning of certain ideologies without what would be considered a rigorous argumentation. I haven't read this. I'm unable to say what it is, but I'm certainly going to be reading it. And one of the first things I want to do is I want to find out about this journal. I don't know it. For all I know, it's a well-regarded, rigorous journal that makes sure it's properly peer-reviewed, but it might not be. So that's the first thing I would look at, because one of the things we need to consider is that predatory publications publish anything. As long as you're willing to pay the money, they'll publish anything. And I can give you some pretty shocking examples of what they will publish, but they certainly, that's a whole different problem. If this is indeed a legitimate academic journal, then you know, I think you've raised such a good question for us to consider. You know, at what point is it someone having a different view, and at what point is it poor science? And poor science doesn't necessarily need to lead to a retraction. If it's poor science in terms of plagiarism, in terms of fabricated data, what have you, then a retraction is obviously necessary. But if it's poor science in terms of an opinion that isn't very solid, what's often needed is not a retraction, but rather some kind of response to show the holes in the argument, to show why it's problematic. And again, I haven't read this, but this might be a case where a response from someone like you, Judith, would be very powerful indeed. Not to say that, okay, this should be thrown out, because we don't want to hear from people who disagree with us, but this should be really handled with extreme caution, because it's just not good argumentation. But I'm just sharing my views. Is there anyone in the room, Asipe, who would like to add their comment to this very interesting provocation that Judith has offered us?
Hi, Sue. There's no one in the room who would like to say something.
Okay. Anyone else online? Otherwise, I think I'm going to call it a day, because, and I'm sorry, I know Thulasile was going to say something and I didn't hear from her, but I had heard from her before. If she wants to say something now, Thulasile, is there anything you want to add now?
No.
Okay. Thanks for your patience. Sorry, I didn't hear from you. Thank you, everybody. I hope that something, as I said today, was more just to kind of get us thinking about being ethical and moving away from thinking about ethics in terms of a process to be completed, and to think about the ideological underpinnings of our research. And I appreciate your being here with me and look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Tomorrow, Asipe is going to be plotting out all sorts of amazing things that are on offer this year, including accredited short courses that can build your knowledge and your CV, including writing retreats, and much more. I sound like an advert now, hey? An infomercial, and so much more. That's not all. Thank you, everybody, for staying with me. Keep well, and thank you, Asipe, for being that side. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks so much. Take care. Bye.